Right now, I want you to pick up your phone and dial literally any number. Boom. In under a second, you're connected. It's totally seamless, it's invisible, and it's completely automatic. But hey, let's look behind the curtain of all that modern convenience for a second. Welcome to our explainer on the rise and fall of a profession that quietly built the modern world, the switchboard operators. Imagine a world with absolutely zero automation. Like, what if every single phone call in the entire country had to be physically connected by a real live person? No computers, no fancy algorithms routing your voice through the ether. Just human hands, moving fast all day long, sitting at a giant wall of wires and plugs just to physically link your call to the person on the other end. And we're not talking about some small niche operation here. At its absolute peak, this single job employed hundreds of thousands of workers across the country. Just let that massive scale sink in for a moment. Hundreds of thousands of human beings forming the literal, physical internet of their day. By the end of this explainer, you're going to understand exactly how this incredible, forgotten workforce operated, and why it basically vanished almost overnight. Section 1. The early phone problem. Connecting lines in the late 1800s. Okay, let's dive right into this. To figure out why this massive workforce even existed in the first place, we've got to look at a pretty huge limitation of early telephone tech. See, Alexander Graham Bell's early phones couldn't actually automatically connect to each other. Every single telephone line ran directly to a central office. So enter the switchboard. It was this massive wall covered in hundreds, sometimes literally thousands of individual phone jacks. Each jack represented a direct local telephone line. Because the phones couldn't just find each other, someone actually had to stand at this central point and physically make it happen. And this created an agonizingly manual four-step process. First off, you pick up your phone, which lights up a signal on the board. Step 2, the operator manually plugs the cable into your specific line. Then step 3, they actually have to speak to you to ask who you're trying to reach. And finally, step 4, they manually grab a second cable and plug it into the correct receiving line just to physically complete the connection. Every single call. Seriously. Just imagine doing that incredibly repetitive four-step process for every single conversation happening in a bustling, crowded city. The intense physical effort required just to keep a city talking is honestly staggering. Moving on to Section 2, the demographic shift. Why women took over the switchboard. Okay, this is wild, and it's a massive surprise to most people, but the very first operators weren't women at all. They were actually teenage boys. And, well, it was a total disaster. Records show they were super prone to pranks, pretty rude to customers, and just completely unreliable during the high-pressure rushes. So telephone companies quickly realized they needed a totally different demographic. They needed patience, precision, and serious professionalism. So by the 1880s, they shifted almost entirely to hiring young women. And the young women proved to be vastly more efficient and courteous. In fact, within just a few decades, telephone operating became one of the largest employers of women in the entire country. The historical significance of this shift is absolutely huge. At a time when career opportunities for women were, frankly, extremely limited, the switchboard offered this really rare, totally respectable, and steady-paying career path right outside the home. It was a real game changer. Section 3. Skills of the trade. More than just plug and connect. So let's dispel a major myth right now. A lot of folks think this was just simple, mindless plug and connect work. No way. The skill set was incredibly intense. During peak hours, an operator might be handling hundreds of calls per hour. That takes lightning-fast hand movements. Plus, they had to memorize entire local telephone exchanges, even memorizing regular customers' preferred connections so they could skip looking up the directory. They were hardcore multitaskers, managing multiple simultaneous calls, tracking holds, all while keeping their voice totally calm. And the physical stamina? Oh man, they stood or sat for hours on end, constantly reaching, stretching, and plugging away. But perhaps most importantly, they were literally the very first line of defense in a crisis. Operators are widely credited with directly saving lives by quickly connecting emergency calls. Remember, this was way before we had dedicated 911 systems. These women handled reports of fires, scary medical crises, natural disasters, you name it. Their calm, quick thinking under extreme pressure really made them the unsung heroes of their communities. Which brings us to Section 4, Working Conditions, the double-edged sword of the switchboard. Now, it definitely wasn't all just heroism and steady paychecks, so we have to balance the incredible societal gains with some pretty harsh workplace realities. Looking at the benefits on one hand, you had a steady income outside the home, a highly respectable career path, and an absolutely essential societal role. But check out the hardships. Despite the immense skill required, they suffered incredibly low pay compared to male roles at the time. Companies enforced incredibly strict discipline, too. We're talking strict rules on their posture, their tone of voice, even their bathroom breaks. Add in the severe repetitive strain injuries from all that plugging, and you've got an incredibly high-pressure, physically demanding environment. Section 5. The invention that ended it all. The rise of auto-dialing. For decades, it honestly seemed like manual operators were going to remain permanently essential. But then, technology caught up. Back in the early 1900s, automatic dialing technology began to creep in. We're talking mechanical and later electronic systems that could route calls without a human. Through the mid-1900s, these systems slowly expanded. Then, boom. By the 1950s and 60s, mass nationwide expansion was fully underway. And by the late 20th century, this once massive manual profession was almost entirely wiped out. Now, it's worth noting that this shift didn't happen overnight everywhere. Small towns actually held on to manual operators much longer, basically because installing all that expensive automated infrastructure out in rural areas took a lot of time. But the outcome was absolutely inevitable. The machines were moving in, and this massive human workforce was unfortunately destined to disappear. And finally, Section 6, a lasting historical legacy, shaping the modern workforce. So, what does this all mean? Why does this forgotten slice of history matter today? Well, this job was a totally critical wedge. It established women as reliable, essential professionals outside those traditional domestic roles, which really paved the way for future generations to enter all sorts of careers. We even still feel the linguistic echoes today. You've probably heard lingering terms like operator assistants. And hey, if you want to see the physical artifacts of this whole era for yourself, there are vintage switchboards beautifully preserved in museums all over the country. The switchboard operators are gone for sure. Digital networks and invisible algorithms have replaced their tangles of wires. But for nearly a century, this remarkable and quite honestly often overlooked workforce quietly connected an entire growing nation. They did it one manual plug and one careful connection at a time. They were the very real human connection long before the digital age took over. Which leaves us with a fascinating and maybe slightly unsettling question to ponder today. As you look around at our world right now, what essential jobs of our modern era will become the forgotten, automated history of tomorrow? History is always moving forward, and understanding what we've automated away in the past really helps us see where we're heading next. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep asking questions.